refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palms joined. Put the palms down. Brave people you are, coming out in the rain. San Diego. Yeah, so how many of you were here last night? Handful of you. Good news is we'll be back here today at 2. But Khenpo Karma, beautiful Tibetan Lama teacher, hysterical. If you've never listened or seen Tibetan Lamas teach, they're just the best. Anyone who can stand up here and tell jokes about how when he was a kid they called him Pumpkin because of his big smiley head. And then he started wearing the red robes and they called him Tomato. You know, so anyone who can make jokes like that about themselves and then just really sum up the Dharma, the triple gem, the Buddha, he said, is, who remembers? Tom? What was the Buddha?
Wisdom.
Wisdom. And then the Dharma was truth. And the Sangha was love. He summed it up. So I'm going to borrow his teachings, I'm sure he won't mind, and share that. And that's it. You know, the funny thing is we look at Buddhist teachings and we look at, 2,500 years worth of this stuff being shared, and so many different cultures and languages and ways of practice. But the essence of what's called the triple gem, for those who don't know, in Buddhism, the 3 jewels, is Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and taking refuge in them and finding safety, comfort, protection in the triple gem. And so part of his talk last night was summing those 3 up as wisdom, truth, and love. And that's it. So if you're brand new to Buddhism, that's really all you need to know. If you've been at this stuff and failing miserably for 30 years, I just simplified it for you. Actually, Khenpo simplified it for you. I stole it from him. But I think it's a really great way of just reminding ourselves how simple this practice can actually be and how often we complicate it for whatever reason. So, and as I said earlier, he'll be back today at 2 o'clock. He'll do another teaching, kind of continuing from last night, although if you didn't hear last night, it doesn't matter. You can pick up anywhere. And then he'll also do a bit of a refuge ceremony, I believe, at the end, which should be beautiful. So, yeah, you're all welcome to join that today, too. So, we'll start with a meditation practice. For those who are here maybe for the first time or never sat before, a couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you, right? You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. Your mind race all day long, just thinking and thinking and thinking, and doesn't shut off. Nobody, really? Liars. It's usually at least one hand goes up. In this whole room, not one hand went up. This doesn't shut off your racing mind. You won't think nothing. Right? Often people think meditation is about thinking nothing or going blank. you'd end up telling yourself, think nothing, and it's kind of a waste of time, might as well get up and go do something. So don't judge your practice. We also judge things all day long, what we look like, what we wear, what we eat. We're constantly in this judgment mode. And this practice of meditation is learning to go beyond judgment and just abide in sensation of breath. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you're on the cushions, often it helps slide into the front third. Pushing the stomach forward allows the back to straighten. Shoulders are relaxed. Hands can be on the knees or in the lap, whatever is comfortable. If you're on the chairs or benches, also just trying to sit up straight. Shoulders relaxed. If you need to move during meditation, simply move. Movement doesn't make you a bad meditator, it just means your leg hurts. I'll guide us as we begin. We'll settle into a little bit of silence. Most important, don't expect anything. We're just going to sit and breathe. Starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, we'll settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Gently guide the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice. Expecting nothing, but just sit and breathe. the mind wanders, lost in thought. Recognize it. Release that thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Letting go of expectation. Letting go of judgments, practice. Just sitting, breathing. Where's your mind? Lost in thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. mind alert. Aware of each sound. Each thought. Each physical sensation. Yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. body still, rested. The speech quiet, aware of all sounds. And the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. No one else to be. Everything beautiful, just as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And as you slowly open the eyes, slowly begin to move. Most important with the practice of meditation is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit, the hands across the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It's everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakening. He was a human being no different than anyone in this room, but began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed. began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. And what that means, very simply, for every one of us in this room, regardless of where you come from, what you believe in, and where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That's it. That's what we get. This practice is simply learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because most of us don't respond to too many things this way. So all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. Go with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. This practice is not easy. It's not necessarily fun. Meditation is not an escape as often people think it is. If your life is a crazy, hectic, stressed out mess, meditation doesn't fix that. Meditation helps you become aware of why your life is a crazy, hectic, stressed out mess, and then you make changes in your life. That's the practice. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's sitting, breathing, getting to know what you think, what you say, and what you do, and learning to be kind to yourself and every other person you encounter every moment of your life. It's about letting go of trying to control what other people think, what other people say, and what other people do, which is where we spend so much of our time. Wanting the whole world to be the way that we want it to be. Yet we have a very difficult time owning that ourselves. We don't practice meditation to be good at meditation. It's not about how long you can sit perfectly still and breathe and sit in some funny, uncomfortable position. We practice meditations when we go out there into that world. We bring this practice into that. That world's going 1,000 miles an hour and they don't really care that you just finished your meditation. They will run you over before you even know it. So when they do, we begin to recognize what triggers us to respond with greed or anger or ignorance. And that's the practice. To me, Buddhist practice has always been just holding up a mirror and looking back at myself and learning to be responsible for my thoughts and my words and my actions. And that's very difficult. Ironically, not very often people get into Buddhism because they're looking for something to bring them a sense of peace and happiness. Because for whatever reason, nothing else has worked. And then you begin to learn about Buddhist practice and you realize it's just pointing back at yourself anyways. Okay. You can only run for so long before you have to sit with your own madness. And once you can sit with your own madness and learn to be okay with that, then you figure out how to get through your days. But it is a lifelong practice. It's not a quick fix solution. Right? Most people feel pretty calm, settled, still, even if your mind raced 1,000 miles an hour and that person sitting next to you, that's fine. Nobody got up and yelled and screamed and kicked and punched anyone, at least that I'm aware of, unless you did it very quietly. Right? The question is, how will we respond to people all day long today? That's why for me it's funny, it comes up periodically, sometimes more so than others, but this idea of the advanced Buddhist class. Do you know how hard it is to just go be nice to people? Trust me, we ain't ready for the advanced class. You know? At least I'm not. I don't know. Try going one day with doing nothing but thinking good thoughts, speaking good words, and doing good deeds, without getting angry, frustrated, sad, or miserable. If you can get through all of that, let me know and I'll point you to the advanced Buddhist class. I've been throwing that offer out there for like 10 years and nobody has taken me up on it yet. Which is a good thing because I wouldn't know where to send them anyways. So I'd rather just stop there, open up to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with that I can address and most likely not answer.
What's a refuge ceremony?
See, Tom's like at a disadvantage because every time Tom asks questions, I just respond so differently from everybody else. I'm sitting here wishing somebody else had asked that question. Anyone else want to ask that question? The refuge ceremony, for those who didn't hear the question, was quietly under his breath because he was almost afraid to ask it. What's the refuge ceremony? The refuge ceremony is, I'll first say it's different in each tradition, right? So every Buddhist monk, Buddhist master, Buddhist nun will do it differently, right? But the essence of it is the same thing. And the idea in taking refuge is, in brief, and I won't say too much about this, you just have to show up at 2 o'clock and find out. But the idea behind taking refuge is first look at what does refuge mean? Safety, comfort, protection, right? The words refuge mean different things to different people. Finding a home, finding a center, finding a balance, whatever refuge is to you. And then you look at the triple gem, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. And so taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha as a practitioner is important if that's a path that you decide is important to you. And often people ask, you've heard me talk about this, how do I become Buddhist? Can I convert to Buddhism? It doesn't really work that way. My master used to say you can shave your head and put on a robe and that doesn't make you a monk. Right? What's in your mind and in your heart is what's most important. So this idea of formally going through some Buddhist ceremony on some levels isn't important. On other levels, it's extremely important and it's beautiful. It's beautiful whether it's important to you or not. But it's, in many ways, I use the word vows a lot. Because they're vows that you're taking within yourself to work on holding yourself accountable to daily taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. And what that means to you, and those who are brand new to Buddhism, again, to touch on it briefly, you're not taking refuge in the Buddha himself, right? He died 2,500 years ago. He's gone. He can't help you, right? You're on your own, folks. Sorry. That's the scary part. You are stuck, right? But what you're taking refuge in the Buddha, and that's why, to me, when Karma Kempo talked about it being wisdom, you're taking refuge in what's called Buddha nature, bodhicitta. That the Buddha was a human being, no different than all of us in this room. He figured out his suffering and how to end it. And so the wisdom is for each of us to figure out what is our own suffering. So you take refuge in this idea that if the Buddha as a human being could end his suffering, then we as human beings can also figure out how to end our suffering. I tend to look at it, I don't wake up and think, how am I going to end my suffering? I wake up and think, can I suffer less today than I did yesterday? Right? Can I remove some levels of suffering in my life that could be removed? Right? So I don't look at it as this goal-oriented thing other than just a constant practice of removing and reducing suffering. And I think that's very comforting. The second one is the Dharma. Right? You call this the truth. That's the true nature of reality, ultimate truth. We all see things from our own lens. How many of you think your view is correct? Liars again. So we roam around thinking our view is correct. That's it. Nobody wakes up thinking all my views are wrong. Anyone know who Thich Nhat Hanh is? He's one of the greatest Buddhist masters to live. His definition of nirvana, freedom from suffering, he says all views are wrong. Right? Don't argue with me, argue with Thich Nhat Hanh. All views are wrong. What that means to me, the way my view, unenlightened, ignorant, wrong view of that teaching, is that my views are only my views. And everybody else is roaming the world with their own views. And because I'm so attached to my views, thinking my views are correct, I'm going to battle and fight and argue with everybody else who completely disagrees with me. And if you don't all agree with me, I'm going to prove to you why I'm right. I'm sure none of you can relate to any of this. But we hold on to these views so tightly. And this is what causes our suffering. So to take refuge in the Dharma, the ultimate truth, also Dharma's teachings of the Buddha, but teachings that lead you to understanding ultimate truth. To me, I found it as a very healthy practice not to search for what is ultimate truth, but to recognize my views and my truth is only my views and my truth. And if I can let go of some of those and begin to embrace and understand and have forgiveness and compassion for others and myself, then I'm going to suffer less. So that's to find safety, comfort, protection in the Dharma. And then Sangha, Karma Kempo talked about it as love. Sangha is the community. Community of practitioners, the people you're around, those you meditate, look at Buddhist teachings with. Your sanghas also track it. How many of you find safety, comfort, and protection on the 805 freeway at 5 o'clock? Right? But if we see that as our sangha, you know who's in the car next to you that just cut you off, or in front of you that just cut you off? Another human being who is suffering. Do you know them? No. Did you even see them, or will you ever see them again in your life? Probably not. But for some reason, because their piece of machinery got in front of your piece of machinery, you hate them. Sometimes we even use finger gestures, I've heard, to let them know that we hate them. So if we begin to see that, yes, our immediate sangha is at the time of Buddha, it was the monks, the disciples, right? As the sangha grew and the nuns and the larger community, they practice together, they hold each other accountable, right? And the Buddha set up a code of conduct to keep the sanghas safe, right? So it's very important to find communities, not just that, intimate communities, but to recognize the community at large is also your sangha, because all you have to do is ask yourself, how have you treated every person you've encountered since you walked in these doors? Now take that sample and look at how you've treated every other person you've encountered during that time that wasn't inside of here. Very likely there's a difference there. And if we can open up and recognize the whole world as our sangha, then we treat them differently. So, the ceremony is somehow encompassing and embodying all of that. And, I know the first time I took refuge, I'd been at the temple, this was 2003, so 16 years ago. And I'd been there all of like 2 weeks, and they said, hey, we're going to a refuge ceremony in Los Angeles. And I was like, okay, cool. I had no idea what it was. And it was really beautiful. So. And I look at them also very much, for those who were at the statue blessing last weekend when we had the Bhante Pinanda and the Sri Lankan masters here. They're also just beautiful things to observe and to be a part of, to witness, to experience, because they're things that you probably won't ever see again, potentially. So even if you're just kind of like a passing participant in a round, when it happens, it's really, really special and really neat to be a part of. I'm sure nobody understood what the Sri Lankan masters were saying as they were doing their blessing, but it's really just a beautiful thing to witness and to experience. And I've always said that Buddhism isn't so much about the words, it's about the feelings in the heart. So, thanks for the question, Tom. Other questions? Always my favorite when you're in a room full of people and there's no more questions. It's uncomfortable for people, it's awkward for people. As some of you know, it's my favorite moment of everything I do here. Yeah.
I'm actually very curious about the smaller statue behind you and the commission.
Yeah, the hungry one.
Is that what?
Yes. So, this is the emaciated Buddha. The very brief story of the Buddha that plays into this statue is, so you familiar with the life of the Buddha?
So,
He was a human, he was a prince, that part. So he's a prince, also made him a human. I guess there could be dog princes and princesses for that matter, but that's irrelevant right now. So, 29 years old, prince, all the wealth, all the riches, all the everything in the world, sneaks out in the middle of the night, sees 4 things: old age, sickness, and death. and an ascetic, a very wise, simple, like a nun or a monk. And this is what's called the four sights. So he says to his buddy, what is old age, what is sickness, what is death? He'd never seen that, he'd been sheltered from it. His father wanted him to be a great king. He knew he had a gentle heart, and if he understood that the world suffered, his father knew he wouldn't become a king and try to rule and kill people. So he eventually snuck out, saw these four things, and then realized the world suffered, so he could no longer live with wealth and riches, and he left it all. He roamed the base of the Himalaya mountains for 6 years, and at that time in India, 2,500 years ago, the people thought that if they overcame attachment to physical form, again, a Hindu practice, yogi practice, they thought that this physical form was what they needed to move beyond the attachment to. So one of the things they did is it said he ate 1 grain of rice a day. And that he was so skinny you could take your fingers and front to back, and that your fingers would touch. So he's cruising around with his 5 buddies. They're hanging like one arm from a tree. They're hanging for like a month. They're standing on one leg for months at a time, right? And then he came to a riverbed, and someone offered him food, and he was hungry. So his buddies were like, no, we can't eat, right? That goes against our practice. And he said, well, I'm hungry. I don't know exactly how he said it, but I'm paraphrasing here. He said, I'm going to put it in the river, and if it goes against the stream, I'm going to eat. So he sets it in the river, the bowl goes against the stream. He decides to eat. Those 5 guys left him. He began to eat, he regained his physical health, right? At this moment in time, you have what's, to me, one of the most beautiful teachings in Buddhism, especially for lay people as we are, right? We're not monastics, we're not nuns, we're not monks. It's called the middle path. And the reality is that if you think of a guitar string, if you have a guitar and you play and the strings are too tight, what happens? Breaks. Strings are too loose, no sound. So the middle path is an interesting teaching because it's different for every one of us in this room, right? How many pairs of shoes do you have? Oh, I wish everybody could have seen that look on your face. Should I guess from the look on your face? The middle path. A room full of liars this morning. So let's say you have, and I'll be generous here, let's say you have 20 pairs of shoes, right? It's possibly higher. Higher or lower? Remember Price is Right? Higher, higher. Card Shark, actually. Right? So let's say you have 20 pairs of shoes. Could you live on 10 pairs of shoes? Yes, right? You don't need 0. You don't need 20. You could live on 10. Right? Let's say we go out for a meal, we spend $50 on a meal. Maybe we could spend 30, right? We go out, we spend 100. Maybe we could spend, 50, whatever it is. So middle path, finding the balance is different for everybody. And when we look at our practice and you explore why we suffer, it's often because we're seeking, craving, and desiring so much. Right? My first teacher, she said, Jeff, you work so hard to make so much money to buy so many things. If you didn't have so many things, you wouldn't need so much money, you wouldn't have to work so hard. Again, that was 16 years ago, and I was like, oh my God, why am I killing myself to get a bunch of crap I don't really want, just to look cool? If I stop trying to look cool, I don't need all this crap, and I don't have to work so hard. I get to do what I want. For some reason, that clicked. So that middle path is different for everybody. And it's important for us to figure out, where is our balance? Right? So he goes on his way. He eventually sits down under a tree. A guy in India says, I'm not moving until I figure out why we suffer. He began to understand the nature of his own mind, and he suffered because of his craving, desire, pride, ego, right? And then the 5 guys, and above the exit sign back there, the door, you'll see that little tapestry. That's the Buddha with the 5 disciples. They came up to him, and they're like, there's Siddhartha Gautama. He looks like he's figured something out. They sat down. He taught what's called the first turning of the Dharma Wheel, the Four Noble Truths. This is the essence of the Buddhist teachings. First one is life is dukkha, filled with suffering. Doesn't mean all life sucks, it just means you're going to suffer a lot. Most of us, if we're here on Saturday morning, 11 o'clock, we know that, right? Second one is the cause, greed, anger, ignorance. And he said, let's practice generosity, compassion, and wisdom to overcome greed, anger, and ignorance. The third one is the ending of suffering. Nirvana, liberation, freedom from suffering. And the fourth one is the path, the Eightfold Path. And that's having the correct views, thoughts, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration. All of that's available on Google for free, right? Very simple. And so they sat with him, this teaching, and they said, we will call him the Buddha. He has figured something out. The Buddha just means awaken, Right? And then he went on, he taught for 45 years, and he died at 80. So back to the statue, when we opened Dharma Wheel Temple, this is now our 13th year. We were 10 years for downtown, and then we moved here a little over 2 years ago. But when we opened, we picked the emaciated Buddha because it represented where we were, and actually where we still are. Most Buddhist temples, you see this enlightened Buddha, as if it's something that we're trying to become. And for us, it was important to recognize that if we're trying to become these enlightened beings and these kind, gentle beings, we must look at where are we killing ourselves? Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. How are we starving ourselves? How are we like this guy right here? And it was very motivating to us because if this guy is a human being near death, could figure out how to end his suffering in the same lifetime, then we too could figure it out. So that became the Buddha for the Dharma Wheel Temple, the emaciated Buddha. And it still, every day reminds us that, you can read all the gentle, feel-good, Thich Nhat Hanh, Pema Chodron books in the world, but at the end of the day, if you don't look at why you're suffering and how you're killing yourself, you're going to have a really tough time on this journey. Yeah. Does that help clarify?
Absolutely.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. Yeah, Martina.
Jeff, when you were just talking, you commented about the turning of the wheel and that was the first turning of the wheel.
Yes.
Can you say a little bit more about that phrase, the turning of the wheel, and what that is?
Yeah, so the wheel, there's lots of symbols in Buddhism, right, as all religions have. And one of the symbols is it's called the Dharma Wheel. And it literally is, think of like Gilligan's Island, right? The spinning wheel? It's a wheel, and it has 8 spokes. And the 8 spokes are the Eightfold Path. So that is kind of the, I don't want to say the main symbol, but really one of the main symbols, or one of the more important symbols in Buddhist teachings is the Dharma Wheel. And the idea is that as you have this Eightfold Path, the views, thought, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration, all 8 of these are turning at the same time in your life as a practitioner. And the Eightfold Path, as I just said, again for those who are new, suffering, cause of suffering, ending of suffering, and the path. The Eightfold Path is the 4th of the Four Noble Truths. So your entire life as a practitioner is turning those 8 practices. And so there's a mudra, it's called the Dharma Chakra mudra, the first turning of the Dharma Wheel. And so that's where he first shared the Eightfold Path and the teachings, and the wheel began to turn. Meaning, and it's been turning for 2,500 years. I think of it as rolling. The Dharma teachings are rolling.
And do they roll from lifetime to lifetime in terms of our lessons?
Yes. Well, yes. Yeah. You're talking about like as an individual from a standpoint of if you believe in rebirth or in that kind of stuff.
From the standpoint of I'm never going to get it all in this lifetime.
Yes, except the danger of having that view is that was probably your view last life.
Yeah.
Huh. That expression was almost as good as yours. I'm asking how many shoes you have. The danger, the warning, the caution, almost always people ask questions around this idea of rebirth. And whether you believe it or not doesn't matter. Think of a rebirth as like the movie Groundhog Day. You're just waking up tomorrow, right? If you don't believe in rebirth or reincarnation, that's fine. You don't have to look at Buddhist teachings. But every moment we're reborn in many ways. But the challenge around asking and looking at rebirth is we only look at it from, well, if I don't get it in this life, what happens next time? And we're forgetting that this is the life that we got from last time. So, to me as a practitioner, and you've heard me say this a million times, practice as if your hair's on fire. That's what Zen Master Dogen would say. I'm not going to sit back and say, well, I'll just do it next lifetime. No, suffering sucks. I have the incredible fortune, the incredible karma, the incredible privilege to be able to be exposed and practice and share the Buddhist teachings. I don't want to do it next time. I want to be done now. So, Just a different way to look at it. Yeah. Yeah. And it's also not as if like we wake up, you know, in our next life all of a sudden and we're like, okay, well, this is where I get to pick up from. Because no, once we're born, our whole conditioning changes. You know, and then we're like, oh my God, now I'm 50 years old and I got to start now. And we just had 50 years of conditioning when maybe the prior life, it would be like waking up every day and having no clue what happened yesterday. How miserable would that be? Or how beautiful would that be? Yeah. There's a great movie, Memento. Anyone seen that?
Yes.
Incredible, where he forgets everything. He's got like short-term amnesia. And he's trying to, I think, solve like a murder mystery or something like that. Yeah, I forget all the details. But he forgets everything every single day he wakes up. So he tattoos and leaves notes for himself. So the next day he gets to follow the trail again. A lot of Buddhist stuff in there. Yeah. You better start leaving clues. Questions? Yeah.
So I had a teacher who once told me that not all compassionate acts are necessarily kind. And I've been thinking of, trying to think of an example, and one that I think is relevant to the temple is, you know, maybe like an intervention to someone, like it may be very hurtful to them, may seem like harsh and critical,
Right.
but you think you're doing like something compassionate. So is it compassionate when
To
you
do things that are
hurt
unkind?
someone? Yeah.
You know, so it's a great question. There's no answer to that, but I'll give you a few things to think about. That there's the two wings of Buddhism are compassion and wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So to have one without the other doesn't always work, right? Ultimately, what it comes down to in that moment, and nobody can answer us for this except ourselves, and even ourselves trying to answer this, we're answering it with some unenlightened mind, right? Is what is my intention? So you could do lots of compassionate things that you think are filled with wisdom that may bring harm and suffering to someone else, right? And you also may do compassion, you know, compassionate acts filled with wisdom that initially bring harm to someone else, but eventually, like you said, intervention, help alleviate their suffering. Ultimately, I think what it comes down to is, what is your, as I said, what is your intention? Driven by compassion, driven by wisdom, but then not attaching to the outcome of it. Right? We see, and this comes up a lot in a place like this, right? Many of us know people in our lives, friends, family that are suffering, that are struggling, you know, when you deal with addiction, when you deal with lots of, you know, mental illness, things like that, and we see them suffering, and it hurts us. And we want to have compassion and love and share and do anything we can to help alleviate their suffering. And sometimes that's just going to piss them off. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it'll work. And sometimes it'll work and still piss them off. Right? So we don't know the outcome. But I know for me, as a practitioner, there are a lot of things I do that come from a place of compassion and I think wisdom based on my intention that a lot of people don't like. And I have to learn to be okay with that, right? I mean, when you lead a place like this for the last 12, 13 years, you know how many people have not liked me and still don't like me? But I have to look at, I remember my rabbi, right, my rabbi. I'll kind of close, I think, with my rabbi. Rabbi Marty Lawson, I met with him, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and he led the Jewish temple I grew up at, Temple Emmanuel here in, Valle del Cerro there, and he led a congregation for like 40 years, from a young novice rabbi to, a retired rabbi, and I sat with him one day, and he said that his teacher in rabbinical school, also probably a rabbi, told him, when you begin to lead a community, a temple, he was talking about a Jewish temple, he said, you must lead based on what you feel is true to your heart, even if 51% of the community disagrees with you. Meaning you can't spend your time trying to please everybody. You have to follow what's true to your heart and your passion and your mission in life. And hopefully that comes from compassion and that comes from wisdom. And what that means is a lot of people are not going to like you. Right? So it's kind of taking it maybe from a different realm you're looking at it from, potentially, but I think the same thing applies with close, intimate friends that we know and love. They won't always like what we do. And learning to be okay with that, I think, is a beautiful practice. Yeah. So those were church bells. So I'm going to close on that. So we'll join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to those who lost lives or suffered from the recent shooting in Paolo. May they all be at peace and free from suffering. May we all be at peace and free from suffering.